So, I think we're good to go now. Once again, to everybody who has just joined us, hello and welcome to our event today. Before we begin, I have a brief technical note. As usual, today's event will be recorded and the recording will be published on our website afterwards. By participating in the event, you automatically agree to this recording. My name is Katharina Lehner. I work for the Secretariat of the German Platform for the Reconstruction of Ukraine, and together with Marius Elbracht from Deutsche Welle Akademie and Rachel Bake from Deutsche Welle, I'm very pleased to welcome you to our workshop, Spotting AI Fakes, Can You Beat the Machine? The German Platform for the Reconstruction of Ukraine is a German government initiative. The platform is aimed at actors from non-governmental organizations that are based in Germany, that want to participate in the reconstruction process, and that are looking for more information, exchange, and contacts. The intention is to provide a platform for networking and expert exchange between the private sector, municipalities, organizations from civil society, as well as from the academic world. A very important part of our activities is the organization of events and expert talks on various topics that are relevant for Ukraine's recovery process. Together with Deutsche Welle Akademie, we are organizing a series of events on disinformation in this context. Today's event is already the fifth one in this series. On our website, you can find the recordings and reports of the first four events. We will post the link in the chat later on. Today, we will take a closer look at the topic of AI-generated fakes and how to recognize them, and we will put a special focus on the context of Ukraine's recovery process. AI fakes, for example, manipulated images or videos that relate to this context, often come up around the time of significant events concerning Ukraine, such as, for example, the Ukraine Recovery Conference that took place in July. Their goal usually is to undermine the legitimacy of international support for Ukraine or just to harm Ukraine in general. Today's workshop will focus on strategies for detecting these fakes. But before I give away too much, I would like to welcome our guest, Rachel Bake, who will lead today's workshop. Rachel is a journalist and media trainer at Deutsche Welle and Deutsche Welle Akademie. She is a founding member of Deutsche Welle's fact-checking team and moderates their fact-checking format for YouTube in English. She's also responsible for training Deutsche Welle colleagues in verification and fact-checking. Rachel began working at Deutsche Welle as a trainee in 2011. Before that, she studied English linguistics and cultural studies with a focus on post-colonial studies in Germany and in Spain. She's also a media trainer and has trained fact-checking groups in Pakistan, Namibia, Ethiopia, and Mongolia. Before I hand over to Rachel for the workshop, I would like to invite all of you to post any questions that might occur during the workshop into the chat. We will have about 20 minutes time for a Q&A session after Rachel's input. If any immediate questions arise during the workshop, please let us know in the chat as well, and we will try to answer them directly. And now I would say, without further ado, let's begin. Rachel, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, welcome everyone to this hopefully interactive and also, very hopefully something where you will learn something about fact checking, but also spotting AI fakes. I think it's the most talked about topic at the moment, not only in the sphere of fact checking, but in general, if you look at any topic, it's usually related to AI audios, AI images, but also AI videos. And of course, as we now heard already when it comes to Ukraine, especially in times of war and crisis, we've seen there's a huge peak in disinformation, especially in AI disinformation. So yeah, Today's session is called Spotting AI Fakes. Can you beat the machine? And I will guide you through this session, and hopefully I'll be able to give you some hands-on tips as well on how you can identify AI fakes. But also, it's very important to know that yes, you can beat the machine. This is something that we will definitely also try and test ourselves during this session. So yeah, first and foremost, I think it's very important to also briefly discuss when we're talking about AI disinformation, why fact checking is important, but also why fact checking matters. So why do we do fact checking at DW, and especially in this time and age of disinformation peaking a lot during times of war and crisis? It's very important to mention fact checking has become a very helpful tool for us as journalists. And we now have a lot of media outlets which are focusing especially on having fact checking units, because they say that the amount of disinformation that is out there in the internet is so much that we need specialized journalists who are just focusing on debunking disinformation, and then spreading that in the news as well. So, of course, one of the important things that we look at when we're trying to find out why fact checking is relevant and why it should be done by news outlets is numbers and statistics. And as you can see here, this is just two small studies that we had a look at, but there's so many studies from worldwide, from different regions around the world, where we had a look and we asked, respondents were asked how they feel about fake news, how they feel the influence of fake news is on elections or democracy in the region, but also on democratic processes. And we've seen here that, for example, in a global study, 87% of people said that they fear that disinformation could influence the upcoming elections in their countries. This was done shortly before the super election year last year. So we see a lot of people around the world are aware of the problem of disinformation, but a lot of people also, as we see in the second study, which was done just in Germany, we see are feeling overwhelmed. So more than 1/3 of Germans feel overwhelmed when it comes to identifying and verifying fake news. So this is a huge issue which we are seeing. We are seeing that it's not just an issue of the global south, which I think is also very important to mention, especially when I go out as a media trainer in different countries. People usually approach me and say, like, yes, this is a huge country in our this is a huge problem in our country, but you in Germany might not be facing this. And it's always important, I think, to also point out, no, this is a problem which is literally mushrooming in worldwide and not just in the global south. And it is not necessarily linked to literacy, but we can see that it is very clearly linked to media literacy. So being aware of how to use social media platforms, but also how to identify credible sources, how to identify sources of information has become very, very important. So, yeah, what can disinformation look like? And I think this is already where we're now approaching the topic more. It's very important to see that we have different kinds of disinformation. It's not just somebody claiming something which is false, or somebody sharing a picture which is false. We have all sorts of different kinds of disinformation which we are seeing in our daily work at fact checking at DW in the recent years. And the most common ones are things which I've put together in a few slides here. So I think the most common one, which most of you will be aware of, is on the left corner, which says false claims. So there we see a lot of times people, even with reputable names, with verified accounts, sharing false claims. For example, here that there's a genocide against white people in South Africa. Then with this video saying that this is where we see all the white people who are buried in South Africa who have been killed or murdered because they were white. This is, of course, completely false, the statement itself, but also the video was placed out of context. Then in the bottom corner, we already have Zelensky, because he's one of the most prominent figures when it comes to spreading disinformation about somebody. He's been a target for a long time, but especially now, we've seen since Russia's war on Ukraine, he's become a very popular target for disinformation. And there we've mostly actually seen fabricated news about him as a person, but also him as a politician. But I'll dive deeper into that in a second. So as I already said, out of context videos. We see the upper right corner. Here we have, for example, a video which was shared early on in this year in spring, where India and Pakistan's tensions escalated, and their people were sharing videos of alleged attacks of India on Pakistan. But in this case, for example, it was not correct. It was actually an old video which was presented out of context. And here we could actually see an Iranian attack on Israel rather than India's attack on Pakistan. And then on the bottom right corner, we have also manipulated content. In this case, a video was shared which was allegedly showing migrants screaming in the streets in Europe that they're going to rape all white women and kill all men. However, it turned out that the video was originally in French, not in Arabic. And in the video, the people were celebrating their football club, which had just won. So it was nothing to do with migrants and nothing to do with rape. And so we see a lot of times images and videos are taken out of context and presented as something else, or they're manipulated to present something else, which is not true. But of course, we also have a lot of narratives that we see now that are being used to spread different propaganda by different states, by countries. And here, for example, we also see a huge mix. We have on the right upper corner media spoofing, also on the left lower corner media spoofing. So the right upper corner, we see a lot of fake websites now pretending to be credible news outlets. So, for example, showing a DW website, or showing a New York Times website, or showing here, for example, Le Monde. And in this case, it turns out, if you look at the URL very closely, that it's not the correct website of that news outlet. It's actually false, and it's sharing fake news, so to speak, either to use the name of that credible news outlet and say, if DW or BBC is reporting on it, it must be true, or sometimes also sharing stories which are completely outrageous and bizarre, and then saying that if they're sharing such content, you should not be believing them because they're not sharing credible news stories. However, we've also seen, as we see here in the upper left corner, that there's a lot of propaganda narratives which are also being shared by official accounts, for example, embassies, representatives of countries, or on the lower right corner, for example, the IDF also sharing a video which was then saying that the medics which were shot by the IDF were armed, and that's why they were shot in defense. However, when we looked at the video closely, we found out that it was actually the shadow of the person which was moving rather than a Kalashnikov, as was stated in the video. So we have a lot of different examples. And last but not least, of course, as you are already probably aware, a lot of AI-generated content is being shared lately. And we have a lot of disinformation in the form of AI, varying, of course. The most popular one you will know is on the bottom corner, which says AI videos and images. So whenever we have breaking news, there's, for example, a war or crisis situation, or there's a natural catastrophe, we have people sharing videos or images saying this is what it looks like right now. So just sharing AI content because there is no real content, or to make it look worse than it actually is. We see a lot of those examples on the ground. Another thing that we have seen, especially ahead of elections now, is in the upper right corner, which is AI-generated influencers. You might have come across those, but they're a bit more tricky to spot. In this case, people who are not real, but are sharing information, either state-sponsored or also funded by parties who are interested in spreading disinformation about a certain topic. So that is also very popular. We also saw it ahead of the German elections. A lot of far-right and AfD-related content was shared with the help of AI-generated influencers, where people were having difficulties distinguishing between reality and AI. And then, of course, I think the most dangerous thing that we are seeing right now at the moment, but it's very, very popular with people who are on social media, is asking Grok or asking AI chatbots, is this true? Is this real? Where is this image coming from? Did this really happen? So a lot of people are looking for quick fact checks with the help of AI, and that is very dangerous because we have seen a lot of examples actually where AI, or in this case, for example, here in the screenshot, we have Grok sharing information that is completely wrong. It's hallucinated. There is no source to the information, or where it's also mistaking real events and claiming that these are actually false. or false events and claiming that they actually happened. So we see a lot of that AI hallucination also now coming into the sphere of fact checking, because people want quick fact checks and don't want to wait for journalists to produce them. So they quickly ask Meta AI, Grok, or other chatbots. And that is something which is a dangerous trend, as I said, that we've been noticing lately, because we also see, and I'll also talk about that a bit more in detail later on, that these so-called AI chatbots can, of course, also be fed with information on purpose to give a response in a certain way. So we've also seen examples of that. So yeah, what are the motivations behind spreading false information? Sometimes people wonder, like, why is this being done? Of course, one of the main reasons is to manipulate opinion, to, for example, get political influence, especially ahead of elections. This is very, very popular, of course. But of course, ahead of elections, one important aspect is also that they want to weaken the trust in candidates, in political parties, or even in the whole process of democracy as a whole. So in Germany, you might have been aware of the fact that ahead of the elections, people were saying that it's not safe to vote by mail. Now, this is something that Trump is also claiming in the US. So we see a lot of times ahead of elections, governments, political parties, politicians, but also other players make claims that the democratic process is not safe, that there's a lot of there's a lot of weak points, for example, ballots by mail, or for example, that the election date is fixed on a rainy day, so people will not be able to come in, or for example, that the ballot boxes are not secured, that people take them and just set them on fire, as we also saw a claim in the US recently. So those kinds of claims are made ahead of the elections, usually to weaken the trust. And so a lot of people then say, you know what, it is so unsafe. My vote is not going to count anyway, so I might not even bother going and voting at all. So that is one of the main reasons ahead of elections. However, we also see now, for example, post-election, a lot of disinformation is still being spread in a lot of countries. For example, I think the most popular one right now is actually the US, to cause a social division. So a lot of disinformation and fake news is being spread, for example, about migrants, about people who are Spanish speaking, about, for example, abortion, about women's rights, all these kinds of topics. And of course, the major outcome of this is to weaken the nation as a whole, which is going to happen. And that is a something which I think, like, even if the US will, in the next term, not vote Trump or his party again, still this is going to take years for the society to recover from this kind of a division that is happening actually in real time right now. Of course, a lot of times we also see a financial gain. So people do this for money, for clicks. The more clicks you get, the more money you can generate off your social media accounts. So a lot of times we see on Instagram, on YouTube, but also on TikTok and Facebook, that people are on purpose spreading fake news about a certain event so that they get more clicks, saying, like, this video shows how the bridge is collapsing in Baltimore. It's actually not the real video. It's an AI generated one, looks very dramatic, is shared a lot, and then they get money for it because they get a lot of clicks. So that is, of course, also one thing which plays a very important role. And of course, what we've seen now a lot lately is a lot of fake news or disinformation is being spread because people want to undermine the trust in media. We have seen studies that in the past years, the trust in media has gone down immensely, and people are saying, I'd rather go to social media for my news as a source rather than to, I don't know, CNN, BBC, or even DW. So that is also happening a lot. And with the help of fake news, this is continuing it even more. As I told you, like, for example, with media spoofing, this is happening a lot. And of course, people use it to spread ideological or their religious agendas. We see this a lot in a lot of countries right now, actually, at the moment, that minorities are being targeted with the help of hate speech through disinformation campaigns against them. And then, of course, some are just doing it, as I said, for some reach, for 15 seconds of fame, as we call it, that it's not really, there's no bad intention behind it, there's no harm behind it, but people want to generate clicks or want to be famous, want to be named as a source in a media report, and that's why they then share, disinformation or fake news, as we also call them sometimes. And yeah, just to give you one example of one last study, I don't want to bore you too much with numbers, but I think it's also really important to see here that the proportion, for example, of people concerned that real and fake, that people are worried about what is fake and what is real online is a real issue, not just in Europe, not just in the US or in Germany, but also worldwide, is something we're seeing here in this study. We see that, for example, the concern for misinformation, but also for fake news being spread online is huge, basically all across the world. People are worried about A, that they're going to face it, but B, also that it's going to somehow change the outcome of elections in their country, or maybe it's going to change how the society as such is working. And so that's why I think it's very, very important that we also jump as news outlets on this topic and say that we have to deal with it. We have to tackle it in a way that people know and are equipped on dealing with fake news when they encounter it. And I think one of the most important or most asked questions when it comes to fact checking is, why do you guys do it when you don't get the same amount of clicks that the people are getting who are spreading disinformation? In that case, I think one thing which is really helping us is recent studies show actually that if a fact check comes out very quickly after fake news is being spread, then it's also very effective in stopping the snowball effect of fake news. And so that's why I think it's very important for us to continue our work, even if we would not get the 10 million or 15 million clicks that the fake news is getting. At least we'll still be able to curb the ball. And so in that case, I think it's very important that we keep doing our job, because that way, if somebody's researching a topic, like we saw, for example, even ahead of the Brexit, people were researching then, what does this mean? What outcome could it have? What does this mean for the tariffs? What does it mean for visas? That people looking for those kinds of answers also have a chance to find verified information. And so that is something we're offering with the help of fact checks. And I'll also briefly show you that, for example, at DW, all of our fact checks always start in the title already with the words fact check, and then comes the title. And this has just shown as also at DW that when we include those words already in the title, that it's becoming, it's getting a lot more clicks, and also B, it's something which has become a trusted source of information for viewers. So what does DW do? Jumping to that question, because of course now we've established why is it important, why should we be doing it, but how does DW do it? Also, just really briefly, I think for us it's important that we also mention we have a mission at DW. Always every year it's defined, because we have a government. We're funded by the German parliament, not by the government itself. That means the government does not have any influence on our reporting. However, we have a DW mission every single year where we say this is important, this is what we want to achieve with the budget that we've been given. And on the very first page of that DW mission, it states that we are highly committed to providing independent and credible reporting, which is really, really important to us. But also we want to strengthen people's resilience to propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation. And in that sense, we think both things are really important and highlight the work of a fact checker, because in our fact checking work, you will also see it's really important that we don't only inform people about fake news that are out there, but also we tell them and teach them how to tackle fake news or disinformation themselves as well. So to sum it up, people go to social media instead of news outlets. So that's why we should have fact checking, because it brings back audience to the news pages. Number two, disinformation is on the rise. It's very, very important to see that it's not just peaking when a breaking news situation is happening, but all the time we see that in general, disinformation has become very, very popular. No matter what age group you talk to, you see people and you hear people always saying and giving you examples of disinformation that they encounter on a daily basis. And of course, at DW, we also say that this is something which is relevant for our audience. And one of our audience needs, which we have identified also through surveys, is that they want to have fact checks which are credible and which are transparent in the use of their sources. So How do we do it, or what are the goals of our fact checks? Basically, number one, of course, we want to counter the misinformation that we see. Number two, we also want to offer clarification on myths and fakes and false statements that we see online. But also, as I said earlier, we want to increase the media literacy of our audience. So I think that is something which also differentiates us from other fact checkers, maybe even in the German market, but also internationally, is that we also always offer guidance on how we've done a fact check, how we found a certain source of information, or why we've come to a certain conclusion in our fact checks. And this is just two pictures of our team. As you can see, we're quite small, but we're still already doing a lot of work. We're basically fact-checking fakes, propaganda, manipulation, and myths, but also verifying content and sources. We do a lot of pre-bunking. For those who are not active in the field of fact-checking, that means that we talk about certain topics or give information or fact checks about certain topics before they become disinformation. So that means ahead of elections, we already go and monitor social media platforms and say like, okay, what kind of topics are people talking about, which are false already, which will then be bigger after the elections. Or for example, to give you a very concrete example, a vaccine is being introduced, for example, in Pakistan. In Pakistan, people are very skeptical of vaccines. And so what we know is that even before the vaccine will come out, people will be spreading disinformation. So people will say that it's going to cause either that, for example, very popular one, that people are getting chips implanted with the help of vaccines, or that it's going to cause infertility. So in that case, we know that these kinds of claims always come when a new vaccine is introduced. So we can already do a pre-bunking article before the actually disinformation campaign starts. So pre-bunking, I think, is very, very important when it comes to fact checks. But then again, also very, very important is the second aspect, which is media literacy. So we also produce a lot of media literacy content and give a lot of media literacy trainings where we also teach. And of course, that part also contains supporting fact checkers and journalists around the world. And at DW, we are very lucky that we also have an IT department, which focuses on developing tools which are relevant for verification. So yeah, that said, just a small overview. This is not something that you guys will be using in your work on a daily basis, but this is just 1/3 of the amount of tools that we're actually using in our fact-checking team, where we do all sorts of work, starting from monitoring topics, but also finding out whether the location of a video is correct or not. And then also, of course, AI debunking, which is our focus on today. But of course, as we also said that we're going to focus on Ukraine, I've just collected a few examples and wanted to briefly also tell you what kind of disinformation, but also disinformation campaigns we have seen, especially when it comes to Ukraine in the past years, because I think it's very important to show it's not just small single events, but there's a whole strategy actually behind it, which is very important. For us fact checkers also to explain to the audience that it's usually not just like, oh, have you seen this video of Zelensky? It's false. It's actually, as we already heard in the beginning, it's part of a bigger strategy to say, oh, this is false about Zelensky and this is false about Zelensky. And all of this actually adds up to, if you see then 7 things which are maybe incorrect about Zelensky, you might start thinking he's a bad person. But in reality, if you actually think about it, it's a whole narrative to discredit him as a person, but also as a politician. So in this case, just to give you a small overview, we have here on the bottom, of course, always when Zelensky meets up with, for example, with Trump, but also with other European politicians, there's always a huge spike in disinformation whenever he meets up for donor conferences, or whenever he meets with politicians because of peace plans or peace talks for the Ukraine. And here, for example, it's either discrediting him as a politician, saying, you know, he's a comedian, he was an actor before, we should not be trusting him. But as you can see on the examples which are on the top, you will also see, for example, that Zelensky is using the money to buy sports cars, to buy mansions, or, for example, that he's bought a luxury hotel or one of Hitler's old cars. So we've seen all kind of like really bizarre and ridiculous claims which have been made about him and the money that he's using allegedly to buy really expensive things. All of those accusations have been false, and they're usually done to say like, ahead of donor conferences to say, if Zelensky is given money now by the US, by the EU, then this is what he's going to use the money for. So that he's basically somebody who's committing fraud and who's using the money, corruptly for his own private purposes. But we're also seeing examples like the one on the top right corner, discrediting him with the help of AI here, saying that he's actually a belly dancer. And so this is not done for fun. This is actually done because people want to claim that Zelensky is not a trustworthy politician, and he's actually somebody who should be ridiculed and should be made fun of. So we've seen actually in the past 4 years so many attacks on Zelensky. I think he's the most popular target when it comes to disinformation campaigns. But as I said, especially ahead of important conferences, ahead of important donor conferences, especially, it's always some sort of claim that he's using the money for private purposes for his family, or that his wife is using the money for private purposes. And these kinds of claims, as I said, are completely, completely wrong, not even blown out of proportion, just absolutely wrong. It's not just us, it's actually a lot of other fact checkers and media outlets who are also focusing on these kinds of examples and who found a lot of examples. We have, for example, here even sometimes topics where Zelensky is not even related to the topic at all, but he's still somehow included in the narratives to somehow make him part of a bigger conspiracy theory again. Here, for example, on the left upper corner, we see ahead of the Paris Olympics, for example, we were debunking topics, and we could also there see that Zelensky's name was popping up in a lot of them, because in a lot of the disinformation campaigns, it was said that Macron is supporting Zelensky and Zelensky is misusing the money, or that because of the war in Ukraine, the Paris Olympics are going to be targeted by terrorists, or that Zelensky is responsible for a lot of fraud that is happening with Airbnb, for example, during the Paris Olympics. And so a lot of fake news, which were completely unrelated, that the Olympics, for example, unrelated to Zelensky, but still he was again somehow made a target of that fake news example. We also have two more examples, which I think is also really important to see, and that also helps somehow sometimes then put the picture, like to make it part of like a bigger picture, but also to put this narrative into a bigger agenda, which is also other fact checkers found out, for example, that Russia was using the same kind of disinformation campaign tactics and strategies, which it had also previously used in Syria. And also, again, we saw new tactics. For example, in the right, in the middle, you can see Russian influencers, for example, on TikTok, who were saying the literal same script in Ukrainian, in Russian, and it was basically hundreds of accounts which were spreading the same disinformation with exactly the same word. And you could put the videos next to each other and hit play, and they would be saying exactly the same things. So those kind of like robotic, but very real influencer campaigns were run by Russia, not only against Ukraine, but also then against Syria again. So we saw disinformation campaigns against Syria, which were then repurposed for Ukraine, but also new campaigns which were used against Ukraine were being repurposed in Syria as well again. So these kinds of campaigns, then you see a lot of times repurposed coming up again and again. For us as fact checkers, when we're active in the field, we actually recognize them quite easily. However, for the average person online, this is not something which is visible at first sight. And one of the biggest problems we see is that a lot of times if you see a fact being repeated 5, 6, 7 times, you actually start believing it. So if you just keep in mind, if you're active on social media and you see a video where you see that, for example, Trump is using so and so much money for private jets, and you see that claim pop up on your newsfeed 5, 6, 7 times, the seventh time you'll be hearing it, you'll be saying like, you know what, I've heard this before, it must be true. And this is exactly what strategy is being used in a lot of Russian disinformation campaigns, especially because here, for example, for these campaigns, no AI was used, but it's actually real people who were paid for, and then they were spreading this kind of disinformation. And just to also give you one example, this is a video that was done, for example, by the BBC, where it also shows, again, it was like soft propaganda, doing a campaign, again, with influencers, trying to influence Russia's war on Ukraine, or the impression that people were having on Russia's war on Ukraine. And I can quickly just play it so you also get an impression of what these kinds of like influencer accounts spreading disinformation look like.
А сейчас мы будем учиться стрелять.
This is a pro-war Russian influencer spreading fake news about the war in Ukraine. These influencers are known as Z bloggers. Z is the symbol for war supporters. They have massive followings on Telegram, and their reports are a unique source for the Western media. But the Z bloggers also spread disinformation, promoting hatred towards Ukraine and the West. They also make money from war propaganda. Top Z bloggers charge from £400 to £1,500 per ad, according to our analysis. Some were awarded by Putin and invited to the Kremlin.
Работа в информационном пространстве – это поле боя, очень важное поле боя. И здесь я очень рассчитываю на вашу помощь.
But they know their future is linked to this conflict. While the world pushes for it to end, Z bloggers insist it must go on.
So this is just one small example of how influencers are being used, for example, in Russia to spread disinformation about the war on Ukraine, making it look, sexier than it actually is, making it appear very important that the war continues, that people are killed, that houses are destroyed. And this is something which is, of course, now here we see example of Russia, but this is something which is also used by many other countries as well. Influencers, as we know them, for advertising products are not only doing that, a lot of them are actually being paid for by governments to also do soft propaganda, as we call it, for them. So this is very common now in many countries around the world.
А сейчас
So now we come to the very important part, which is more interactive. It's just not me talking, but also for you to see how to spot AI images and videos. So we've been talking about a few examples now, but I think it's very important for you, as I said, also for us, it's very important to always give this media literacy aspect to give you tips. So I'm going to give you 5 tips on how to identify AI generated images and videos at the moment. These are true for now, but as we all know, AI is constantly improving. So these might not be true in 2 months or 2 years from now. So we have seen a rapid improvement of AI generating tools in the past few months, especially in the past few weeks. We've seen a few new tools come out, which are very, very good, dangerously good. But I think the good news is that there are still things in there where we can learn and we can then catch AI generated content. One of the good news is, actually one of the best news is that most of the AI generated fakes that you will be encountering in the internet are actually cheap fakes. So we call them cheap fakes because they're really visibly AI generated even at first sight. Here, for example, we saw a video of allegedly Zelensky marrying this famous boxer Klitschko. Both of their faces had been used with the help of AI. They had been manipulated into a wedding video of a different couple. And in this case, again, to discredit Zelensky, as I said, sometimes it's just bizarre and obviously fake, but it's still being done. And people are still commenting, oh my God, he's actually gay, he's married a man, and these two are in a relationship. So discrediting both people at the same time. However, cheap fake, and most of the time you will be encountering things which are visible with a clear eye. However, as I said, most of the time you will still see in the comment section people falling for it or believing it. Another really popular way of spreading AI disinformation is so-called soft fakes, which means they look like these ones, like storybook or cartoonish kind of prints. On the left, you see, for example, the AfD actually released a video showing what Germany could look like if people voted for the AfD. So everything would be white and blonde Germans again and tall. And they were also showing a dystopia. If you would not vote for the AfD, what was it that you were going to get? So this is done a lot of times. Soft fakes are created where parties then claim we don't want to deceive. They're obviously AI. However, we see, even though they have this cartoonish look to it, a lot of times people are, again, still falling for it and saying like, oh, but this is exactly what could happen. So these soft fakes are used to predict a future which is not there. So there are no images to actually portray it. However, with the help of AI, you can then generate a picture of what you think the future would look like. And on the right side, we have here an image which Donald Trump posted in the election campaign ahead of the US elections last year, where he said that if you vote for Kamala Harris, you're going to get communist USA. So again, also clearly AI, if you look at the crowd of people in the bottom, however, people still fell for it and said, like, this is not what we want. This is dangerous. This is what her, her party talks actually look like. So we should be scared, and we should also be wary of, voting for her. So both examples very common, but also just to show you a quick summary of the work that we have been doing lately. In most of the stories that we have been covering in the past months, a majority of the content is actually AI manipulated now. Last year, this was not the case. We were only seeing like every, I would say, 8th, 9th, or even 10th story as an AI generated image or video which was being used. However, now in the past weeks, I would say every week we have at least on a daily basis, one story in it, which is also related to AI generated content. So it's increasing a lot and it's becoming much, much better. So two things which are becoming very dangerous, and that's why we think it's very important to teach people how to identify it. So number one, how can you identify it? Number one is to take a closer look. Whenever you see an image and you feel in your tummy, something is off, then I think you should always take a closer look. Stop is number one, because what we usually do is we take our smartphones and we just scroll. So don't just scroll on, but actually stop and take a closer look. Zoom in on details. For example, in this case, we have the name of the logo, or we have the name of the train station, or we have the name of an advertisement in the background. Look at those details, zoom in and find out. And in this case, you will see most of the time the text that is written there is absolute nonsense. So if you just look at it casually, the logo on this boy's jacket might pass as the North Face. However, if you zoom in, you will find out that it's not called the North Face. It's just letters which look very similar from far away, but when you zoom in, it's not complete letters at all. And even the logo is wrong. Or for example, in the background, you will see that, for example, things are there, for example, in the lower picture, which are supposed to look like Hausa or Amharic, and you will zoom in and you see that the language is completely wrong. It's also a lot of times with Arabic or with Hebrew, for example, letters or languages which are not very commonly used in AI yet. English is still the most popular one. So with those languages, you will also see that more mistakes are happening when it comes to generating a language with AI. Number two, also really important, is always search for the origin of an image. So what we always recommend is whenever you see a video or an image where something is happening where you're like, this is too good to be true. Did this actually happen? Or it's so outrageous. Did it really happen? Did, for example, Zelensky actually do a belly dancing course or a performance? What you can do is always do a reverse image search. This has become really easy even with your smartphones. You can do a reverse image search with the help of Google, for example. Just take a screenshot and do an image search, and you will find out if the image has been used before, and if yes, in which context. And with AI, for example, you will also see that, for example, there's no older versions of the video. However, what you will find is you can try to find other documentations of the same event. So for example, if here, for example, in this report, we were looking at a video which was allegedly showing a protest in Israel. And it was Israelis going on the street saying that Israel should not attack Iran. And in this case, for example, we said if this huge protest is happening, we should find other videos or images of the same protest. However, there were none. And we also then confirmed with our reporter on the ground and asked her if there were actually protests happening right now. And she said, no, this is not happening in the city right now. So she also confirmed. But yeah, it's really important to check the news context. I already saw one question in the chat right now just briefly pop up where somebody was asking, what about German? More mistakes as in English? Actually, no, German and English are both very good, but I think English is the most trained language which is used right now for training AI. And that's why English is actually the one with the least mistakes. And as soon as you come to any other language, it's going to show you more mistakes. But for German, for example, AI would definitely make less mistakes in German than it would in Arabic, for example, just because the systems are not being trained that much in those languages. But as I said, it's continuously improving. So that's why it's really, really important to always stay on track of like how good has AI become. And that is only something which is possible if you constantly stay up to date on how good have AI generating tools become, what kind of new development is out there on the market. So yes, writing, for example, might be something we can catch today, but it might not be something we can catch maybe in a month or two from now, because it's going to improve again. So that is really important. Check out if you find news stories or other credible sources also reporting about the same event, yes or no, because in today's time and age of smartphones, you will even be able, or you should be able to find other videos of the same event, because everyone's out there with smartphones and people are recording videos and uploading them to the internet. Number 3, very, very important, also still happening, but who knows for how long, is in the background. For example, AI is still not able to like put a lot of energy into the entire video or into the entire photo. So in this case, things which are happening in the front are usually very, very good. But things which are happening in the background are really difficult for AI to actually get them completely right. So in this case, for example, we had a video of allegedly showing attacks on Tel Aviv. And in this case, for example, we could see in screenshots that cars were coming from the top and cars were coming from the bottom. And where they met in the middle, instead of crashing into each other, they were merging and becoming one car. So that is a huge technical AI glitch, which is still happening a lot of times in the background, that objects, people, cars, trees, whatever it is, even houses, sometimes they just merge. So those kinds of things are still happening. Shadows and reflections might not align. AI has, in a lot of like the tools, it has actually learned that if the sun is coming from the top left corner, then the shadow should be pointing in the opposite direction. However, a lot of times it's still not getting the complete angle 100% correct. And one of the things that we always do is we always work with, for example, digital, for example, rulers or things where we actually hold it and find out the exact degree of the shadow and the exact length of the shadow. Because within one image or within one video, according to rules of nature, the shadows should all point in the same direction and have the same length if no artificial light is being used. So this is of course not going to be the case in a press conference where you have light from a lot of different sources, or for example, a football stadium, because you also have light from a lot of different artificial sources. However, as in this case, if the only source of lighting here is the sun, then all the shadows should be the same length and pointing in the same direction. And so there we can check if that is actually happening or not. But with newer versions, this mistake is happening less and less. So also something to keep in mind. And of course, we have to look at body proportions still. A lot of times AI gets things like hands, fingers, ears, and body proportions wrong. And there might be strange edges, as we can see in the right picture as well, that sometimes things are cropped out or edited. Also, we saw with Zelensky's image that these things are just wrong. And a lot of times I also say AI does not have common sense. That is one big advantage that we as humans have over the AI, is that we know, for example, that the police car, for example, the red lights or the blue lights are on top of the car. They're not on the sides of the car, or they're not at the back of a car. Or for example, if a fire is coming, a huge fire, humans would usually not run towards the fire, or animals, they would run away from the fire. So natural behavior, so-called, is also something which AI does not know of. Of course, these are all things that AI will be trained in. So these are things which AI will also improve in. But in most of the cases, our general knowledge, our common sense is going to help us identify things which are just off in videos or in images. And so looking at these tips, just to give you one quick example, sometimes things just don't make sense. Sometimes they look too good to be true. Just quickly play this short video, which is more fun than anything serious, but just to show you AI has become really good. But if you just look at this video very closely, you will see the bunnies, for example, at first sight, they might look really cute and real. However, the longer you look at it, the more inconsistencies you will see, for example, with bunnies having ears where their bum is supposed to be, or for example, bunnies suddenly appearing and disappearing. So that is also something that sometimes happens in these really, innocent AI generated videos. So this is just one small example. And then I would actually like to start the little quiz that I prepared with you for you guys. And I would like to do it with you to identify whether the images you're seeing, I will always show you two side by side, and I want you to identify which one is real and which one is not. So number one, two classrooms or two sets of students, which one do you think is real and which one is AI? You can quickly write your answer in the chat. Left AI. Yeah, a lot of people for number one on the left side as AI. Left AI. Yeah, most of people are agreeing that number one or the left picture is AI. And you are correct. In this case, we can see it, but there's a lot of hints in the picture actually. For example, if we look at just the girl who's on the far left with this bright pink shirt, for example, her right arm is very thick in comparison to her left arm, which is very slender, but it's also super long. It's even reaching across to the girl who's like sitting like two kids away from her. Then we have the blonde girl who's coming after the dark-skinned girl. She's wearing a blue shirt. For example, here one hand is missing. If you look at the very first hand in the lower left corner of the picture, you will see the paintbrushes being held wrong. So the brush part is on top rather than on the bottom where the kid should be painting with it. And all of the kids are actually holding the brushes in a very odd way. What about this one? One woman is real and one is AI generated. Which one do you think is AI? Right is AI, says Matthias. Left AI, left AI, left AI. A lot of people are for the left one for the right one. The tattoos are weird, yes. One more for right, so a lot more for left than for right. In this case, let's find out. Left AI. One more comment. Yeah, the left one is actually real, even though she looks more unreal. But here we also see that it's actually from stock images. And she's a real human being. However, with stock images, we know that they have been airbrushed a lot. So that gives you maybe sometimes that weird feeling about a person, or also because models tend to have sometimes features which might be over exaggerated. And that's why they're chosen for modeling, but they actually then appear more inhuman or unhuman to us when we watch it. On the right side, yes, we already saw in the chats, the earrings are one thing which are different in both ears. Also, the ears themselves are different, completely different ear lobes and ears. So inconsistency with AI again. Also, look, if you look at her collar, you will see on the right side of her neck and the left side of her neck, she has a completely different shirt collar. So the longer you look at it, the more you will become aware of issues with the image on the right side. However, I think it's very, very realistic. It fools people very well. And in this case, for example, we have a website which is called This Person Does Not Exist, which can be used by anyone for free, and you can generate any person you would want to. So you can say you want to have a female in her 30s who has black hair, brown skin, has freckles, is wearing earrings, and you can generate that persona very quickly. A very, very dangerous website, I think, in my opinion. It's being used a lot by bots, and they're generating human-like pictures then to support their social media accounts. What about Mount Fuji? Which one is the fake one? Any guesses? The right side is fake. Is one comment. Right. So far, everyone's agreeing that the right one could be fake. Right, the shadow in the lake, right, is fake. Yeah, a few hints already mentioned. The reflection in the right picture is actually too good to be true. Also, if you look at the leaves above Mount Fuji, you will see that they're very one-dimensional. The leaves which are supposedly in the lake are also very one-dimensional. So yeah, the right one is actually the AI one. The left one also in here, what you can see is you actually see buildings and trees in front of Mount Fuji as well, which is also how, if you then would Google Mount Fuji, you would find that the real Mount Fuji is, located in front of a city. What about Hong Kong at night? Which one do you think is AI? Any guesses? Left is fake. Here's one comment. The chat left. We have one for right. Two for right. Left. Right. There it says like a computer game, but which one? One of them. The left one, yes. So in this case, yes, the left one is the AI fake. Left, we have also the hint repeating housetops. Exactly. I think that's the biggest giveaway. If any one of you has ever worked, lived, or had a friend with who's an architect, you will know that they will never build the same city, the same building in a city again. So the Burj Khalifa, for example, or the Post Tower in Bonn, you know that it's always one very like distinct building in one city. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 buildings with exactly the same glass rooftop, which is of course not likely with any architect. Also, as somebody mentioned in the chat, the repeating the white houses in the background, they also look very one-dimensional, also kind of fake. It looks like a computer game. And then also in the background, for example, the mountains are also a giveaway that the mountain range continues throughout the picture, whereas in the real Hong Kong skyline, if you would then check it, you would be able to find out that it ends like halfway through. And then towards the water, the mountains start ending and do not consistently stay. What about this frog? One of them is real, one is AI. Which one do you think is the AI frog? Any guesses? So counting fingers doesn't help, okay. Yeah, both look super AI-ish, yes. Both are very colorful. And then we have here left AI, right AI, and left again, right again. So it's like, I think in this one, you are most undecided so far. The left one is actually AI. And if you look at the toes of the frog, it is actually a giveaway that, for example, here on the right leg, you will see the frog's left leg, but in the picture, you'll see in the right lower corner, it has 2 toes on that leg, which are going on the right side, and 2 toes, which are going on the left side, which could be possible. Some animals have mutations too, but in this case, it's odd. Also, the focus on the front, on the roof, on the wood or the stone, whatever the frog is sitting on, it's either in focus or out of focus, but it cannot have focus, unfocus kind of parts in a picture. That is something AI does a lot, actually, is it does not have one sharp focus point. So in that case, that is also a clear hint for AI. Also, the eye of the frog is a huge giveaway. If you compare it to the right eye, to the right frog, the eye there, you will see that it's very round and very like frog-like, whereas the left one, the yellow frog, has a very reptile kind of eye, which is also not, something you would find in a frog. And then the bumpy skin on top is also another giveaway. So there's a lot of smaller clues, but definitely a more difficult one. And then we have ancient Egyptian papyrus. Which one do you think is the AI fake? We have 1 vote for right, 2 votes for right. Any more votes? One more for right. Yeah, that's also good. The right one has no coherent story, whereas the left one does give a narrative. So that's also interesting. Looking at the context is always really important. So in this case, yes, the right one is the AI one, even though some people say like, oh, it looks like a picture from my history books. But yes, very clearly it's AI. Also because if you would then talk to an expert who knows Egyptian hieroglyphs, for example, some of them just don't exist. So they're completely made up. Just make it look like a, bird or a snake, and people will say like, oh yeah, that could be true. And also, if you look at the person who's on the left, on the right picture, but on the left side has 3 arms rather than 2 arms. So AI glitch, even in a cartoon, is happening here, or like a painting. So that's also something which is a tell. And last but not least, we also, of course, see this not only in images, but also in videos. So here it would be important to show you also 2 examples, which one is the real woman and which one is an AI generated woman. Any guesses? I can also play again. Any guesses? Left one is AI. Yes, that's true. Here we also see, if I play it again, in this case, you will see, for example, her hair keeps changing throughout the video.
మీరు అయ్యో సాంగ్ చూసుంటారు అందరికీ సాంగ్ నచ్చిందా?
Also in this one, we see now that the right one actually has a voice. So that's also something, another giveaway. And here, for example, if you look at her hands, for example, in this frame here, you will see that she has red nail polish. However, if you look towards the end of the video again, you will see her hand appears again, and this time she's wearing white nail polish. So those kinds of things are also, again, inconsistent, but also towards the end of the video, you will see, for example, here, the last frame, her mouth also looks really strange. The badge is consistently with Google on top as the logo, so that's quite good. But otherwise, there are technical glitches. For example, also her dress here, for example, sometimes you see here, for example, a part of the dress is missing, whereas if you go towards the back here, you see that it's there. So those are also small details which are just wrong throughout the video. So those are things which the AI is not able to complete yet. And then usually with the right one, people think because of the way she's shaking her head that it might be actually unreal, but it's actually a real woman who's hosting a show, and she's just doing a very typical Indian head movement. And then also when you play the video with sound, that's also something you would find with a reverse image search, find another version. and see if there's something different. In this case, we found it with sound, and we actually heard the person speaking as well. And we found out, yes, it's her real voice. Yes, this is her speaking. And also found other footage of the same event and could tell that, yes, this is actually a real person. However, the left one is, I think, also really important to tell you. This is actually an image to video AI generator. And in this case, you could even take a picture of me, for example, put it in there and prompt a video of like 10 seconds, 15 seconds, or in this case, for example, 9 seconds of me doing something, saying something which is not real. And these tools have also become very, very realistic, and they're even more difficult to spot because the photo that you've used to prompt a video is actually real. And so that's more difficult for the human eye to tell, but also right now for for AI detectors right now to spot. So yeah, that was the small quiz. I think exactly what I told you in the beginning. If you know what to look for, if you know what kind of clues are out there, also keeping in mind that all of these things change a lot, you will see that you guys still pointed out or identified correctly which one was AI and which one was not, but also giving already clues in the chat saying like, this is why I think this is right and this is AI. So I think it's just really important to note, yes, AI is consistently improving. It's becoming better and better. But there are two important things. Number one, we have common sense, which AI does not. Of course, AI is being taught a lot in the meantime. But number two, what is also really important is a lot of tools are being right now developed to help us identify AI content. But I think the most important message from today should be that we are aware that AI content is out there. And number two, how do we identify it? So media literacy, I think, is a very, very important part here. That said, I would hand over to Katarina, and then maybe we can do like a question answer session if you have any questions right now for me.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel, for this very interesting workshop. I have to say, I myself didn't identify all of the images correctly, but I have definitely learned something today. And I think that is true for the other participants as well. We have now some time left for a Q&A session, and we have already collected one question from the chat coming from Adnan quite in the beginning. Since we do have time, Adnan, would you like to raise a question yourself, if he's still here? I think he might be one of the people who had to leave early, but that's okay. I can read the question. After AI innovation, which tools or software are available to verify news or information authentication?
So what tools exactly, like names, or what was expected probably from the question, I would assume, right?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so there are, of course, a lot of tools which are out there. Right now, I have to say most of the tools give us a 50-50 chance of giving us the correct answer. So that's why we as fact checkers say it's very important to identify ourselves first. So if you look at a picture, if you look at a video, to say, these are the hints in the picture why we think this is AI generated, and then we ask the tool on top of it. Right now, there are, for example, there's one tool called Hive Moderation, which is very popular, which is out there, which is being used. It can be used for audios, videos, and images. It's also for free. Also really important to mention, a lot of these tools are still accessible for free, which is really important. And then number two, there's AI or Not, which is also really good at identifying. And then there's also one which was very popular end of last year, which was called True Media. However, the license was not extended beyond January this year after Trump's inauguration because there was no funding for it. Right now, I've seen on its website that they're getting funding again, so they're going to start their work again. However, with all of the tools that we have tried and tested, I have to say, and we've tried and tested probably some 20 tools which were already defined as good on the market. And some of them are very good at identifying and some are not good, but with every tool that we use, it's always a 50-50 chance the tool is getting it correct. And that's why we say depend more on your journalistic or human skills rather than depending too much on the tools themselves.
Thank you. We received a second question from Sia. Would you like to come in and raise the question yourself? You should now be able to unmute yourself. This doesn't seem to be the case. I'm going to read out the question. First, thanks for the time and the explanation. I have a question: how to identify the place if a video is circulating on social media while claiming a specific place?
Yeah, so I think that is something which is known as geolocation in fact checking, where we find out if, for example, a video is allegedly showing an explosion in New York. How do we find out that this is actually a video from New York? I think with places where there are buildings, it's always easier because we can say, like, in the background, we see the name of a street, we see a specific building, we see a coffee shop. So those are markers in a video or in a photo where we can say, like, okay, those are things we should be able to track down to. So, for example, an explosion has happened outside of a tram station, and right behind it we see Dunkin' Donuts, and next to that there's a McDonald's. So we have to now identify, in New York, is there a place where there's a Dunkin' Donuts right next to a McDonald's and there's a tram station in front of it? So there are like 3 markers which we can take from the video or from the photo, and then we can relocate it as well on Google Maps, for example, or satellite imagery. That always helps. It's more difficult, to be quite honest, to geolocate something as a fact checker if this is happening somewhere outside of a city, so in a very rural area. So, for example, now flooding in Pakistan and India is really difficult sometimes to tell, is this now Pakistan or is it India? Because of, for example, the trees we are seeing, or because of the nature we are seeing, it's very similar in both countries. So in that case, we rely more on other markers in the video. For example, what kind of voices are we hearing? What kind of language are people speaking? What kind of dialect is it? Or, for example, what kind of car do we see in the video? Is it a car which is actually popular and used in Pakistan, or is it a car model which is more popular in India? So there are always hints within a picture which you can use to identify whether a video, image, or an audio is from a specific place or not.
Perfect, thank you. We have another question from Xenia. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, I will try. Hi, first of all, Rachel, thank you for this interesting lecture. So yeah, I'm working in NGO that's working with human rights in Ukraine, so it was especially interesting for me. And I'm watching, like, all time I'm watching these videos and the social media from AfD, as you mentioned, for example, as an example. So how to protect us, how to make our content like more visible? Maybe you can tell me what to read in the topic so we can be competitive, our content can be competitive with all these AfD things.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunately, as I already said earlier, it's very difficult that you like gain the same kind of clicks as the disinformation content. However, I think it's very important to continue to spread information about, like, these things which are out there are actually false, to raise awareness for it. Also, I think it's very important that if you do not want to see that much of it on your newsfeed, that you also don't engage that much with that kind of content. So in that case, for me, for example, for my private smartphone, I always say, like, I'm not going to do work stuff on my smartphone, because then my newsfeed, my private newsfeed, is also going to be full of it. And sometimes even that amount of disinformation you're engaging with or seeing is going to traumatize you. So especially, you know, if you're coming from a region where it's also harming the people on the ground because of a war which is ongoing, that might be something which affects you. So in that case, I would say, like, do it on your work computer. Try to keep it limited to that. Don't have your social media platforms logged in. Use an incognito browser to do that, to also avoid that, like, you know, advertisement or things swapping over to your real social media accounts. I think that's a way of protecting yourself, but also following the trends which are happening right now in real time is also very, very important. And for that, for example, I can just give you a few websites as a further reading tip from my end. Like, it's not just DW which is working on fact checking. It's a lot of other media outlets and fact checkers as well. And for that, I've put together a small small collection of tools, which I can just also paste in here, where I think it's really important if you want to stay on top of things, if you just see where is disinformation developing, in which direction is it developing in right now.
Thank you.
We do have another question from Johannes Nathan. Would you like to come in and ask the question yourself?
Yes, I hope you can hear me. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I basically wrote it already in the chat. First of all, thank you for a really fascinating talk. And I'm really struck by the sophistication of some of this AI-generated content. And I was just wondering, are regulators or legislators thinking about somehow asking AI generators to mark the content which is generated, not perhaps visibly, but with a sort of invisible watermark in case of images, or invisible watermark in case of music or whatever? Are developments on the way in this direction?
Yeah, actually, that's exactly the direction that they're like, that is one of the safest way that we're seeing right now, that these things are being marked with, for example, now with Gemini or even with Google Veo, which is one of the most popular tools right now and one of the best in generating AI content. These invisible markers have been included already. So that means even if you do a search on that item, Google will already read the metadata and tell you this has been generated with the help of AI. However, one problem that we are facing, like which we identified as fact checkers, was what if I see that on my smartphone and I screen record it or I do a screenshot? That metadata, the invisible one, is still gone. So that's like there are still hurdles in that, and we're trying to find out how we can, protect things which should be protected. In Europe right now, or in Germany, I think we're quite in a quite good situation that the governments and the EU are pushing for stronger, for better rules, for stronger legislatives. However, we see that, for example, in Asia, in Africa, or even in the US, this is something which is not being followed up right now. So there's no big pressure on the social media platforms right now from that end to actually mark the content. But we're seeing that a lot of the AI generating tools are now hopping onto it, and the tools which are being developed to detect it are also out there to detect these sorts of like AI watermarks, but also the buildup of an audio, a video, or a picture. If it's artificially constructed, the pixels are also a giveaway. So that's also one thing that they're looking at right now.
We do have another question, or rather a comment by Sonja Wiesmeyer. Sonja, would you like to come in, or should I just read the comment? I think I will just read it. Sonja says, if we double check other sources, it could also happen that those pages have already reposted the fake photo or video. Rachel, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is also, of course, something that we have seen. However, I would say most of the time, if you look at credible sources, so for example, if you stick to, I don't know, BBC, CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, fact-checking outlets, for example, there are recognized fact checkers, like DW is also one of the recognized ones from the IFCN, which means the International Fact-Checking Network. If they have reported about a certain picture, then you can trust that that has definitely been checked. However, it's human beings who are doing these things. So of course, it could also be true. We have seen examples of even the BBC sometimes, not sometimes, but like maybe 2 times in 1 year has fallen for an AI fake because they've become so good. In that case, however, you can also see that they will correct their reporting. But a lot of times, because media houses are aware of this, they will not be falling for this kind of content. So you can actually trust that if somebody has reported on it and it's the ARD, ZDF, or I don't know, BBC, CNN, and they're using the picture, that it's been verified independently before they're using it in their reporting.
Great, thank you, Rachel. We do not have more questions in the chat, but we would have time for one last short question. If anyone has a spontaneous question and wants to come in, now is the time.
Yeah, if there's no question right now, one thing I can also still maybe do some advertisement for because I saw Marius also did some advertisement for Spot. That's also a tool which was developed by DW, which helps with geolocation. One other tool which is also developed by the same team is called Sharpen Your Senses. It's basically a web page where you can, if you're interested in, sharpening your visual skills, your hearing skills, you want to test how good you are, there's small little quizzes on there where you can look at pictures and find mistakes, for example, or if you hear a sound, what do you hear? Is it a mouse clicking, a computer mouse, or is it actually a bird, or is it, for example, a washing machine or an escalator? So things which sound quite similar, and you have to identify what you're actually hearing. This is also something I think which is very important, the sharpening your senses part, because that helps you in fact checking, but also in identifying AI, because the better you are yourself at doing this, the less likely you will be fooled by AI. So I think it's very fun. It's very interactive. Also something, if you have kids, for example, you're stuck on a train ride, you can do it easily with all sorts of age groups as well. So that's also something I think I would recommend to try out and see how good you perform there.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Okay, if there are no more questions, then we're almost at the end of our event. Rachel, thank you again for the great workshop. And of course, also thank you to all the participants for the discussion and for the questions that you have raised. Before we wrap up, I would like to inform you about our upcoming events at the platform. We should have a slide for that as well. On September 25th and October 14th, the platform will host 2 online events from the series Cities and Regions in Focus. Next week, on September 25th, we will talk about Kyiv, and in October, the focus will be on Dnipro. Later in October, on the 20th, we will co-host a panel discussion with CUE, the Competence Network Interdisciplinary Ukraine Studies, and the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences and Humanities. The event's title is Fault Lines and Lines of Defense, Ukraine's Infrastructure in War, and it will take place at the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences and Humanities in Berlin. Registration for the event will be open soon, and you can register under the event that we have, under the link that we have posted in the chat. For those of you who would like to give us feedback on today's event, I would like to invite you to participate in our quick feedback survey that should be appearing on your screen any moment. Here it is. As always, your feedback is greatly appreciated, and it really helps us to further improve our activities. And in the very end, we would also like to invite you to subscribe to our mailing list and to join our LinkedIn group in case you haven't already done so. Again, you will find all relevant information and the links on the slides or in the chat. The recording of today's event, as well as a short report, including Rachel's presentation and some recommendations for further reading, will be published on our website soon as well. And with that, I would like to thank you all for participating today. Goodbye, have a nice afternoon, and I hope to see you next time.